Welcome back, everybody, to another Swift programming tutorial. This is part 11 of our basic series, and in this tutorial we're going to go over tuples or tuples. You will hear it pronounced both ways. A quick definition. Tuples typically group related values into a single compound value and can contain mixed types. If your data structure is complex or will persist beyond a temporary scope, it is better to use a class or struct. So let's go over some examples of how to create and use tuples. Here we have in our first example the syntax that you can use to create a tuple. So just give your tuple a name and then assign in round brackets the tuple elements. And remember, in our definition we said that you can put mixed types in a tuple. So for example, here we have a string and we have an integer. Now these values are related, so this is a made-up movie name here, and this is a made-up score or ranking for that movie out of 100. Now you can also do something to tuples, which is called decomposing or decompose a tuple, and to do that we use this syntax. And basically what you're doing here is you are assigning variable names to the values of that tuple, okay? So this variable name, movie name, will correspond to this value, and this variable name, movie rating, will correspond to this value. Now notice the syntax, because it might be just a little bit unfamiliar at first. We use the let, reserved, or keyword, and then inside the round brackets you put your variable names, then just use a single equal sign for assignment, and then put the name of the tuple that you want to decompose. And if you don't want to assign variable names to all the elements of that tuple, you can just simply put in an underscore for the element that you would like to leave unnamed. There are a couple different ways that you can access the elements of a tuple. Here we have one example, and this is where you're going to use the index of the values in the tuple. So for example, to access this first element here, we're going to reference the tuple name, and then we're going to use a dot, and then we're going to use index 0. Now, very much like arrays, the index for this tuple and its values start at 0. So this would be 0, and this would be index 1. Okay, so when we use tuple1.0, that will give us movie ABC, and when we use tuple1.1, that will give us the value 98. Now you can also access the tuple1 values using the variable names from when we decompose the tuple here. So once again, this variable name, movie name, corresponds to this element of tuple1, and this variable name, movie rating, corresponds to this element. So these two prints will actually print out the same thing. It's just we have accessed them in two different ways. One using the indexes and one using the variable names from when we decompose the tuple. So let's go ahead and print this. And you can see down here in the console we get what we expect. We're good to go. Another way to create a tuple uses syntax that looks like this. And the main difference here is that we have gone ahead and we've given the values names right at the beginning. So for the string value dog, that name will correspond to animal. For the string value Doberman, that will correspond to type. And you can see that the syntax for the rest of the elements follows the same pattern. Now if we just put this tuple into a print to display the elements, let's go ahead and show you what that prints to the console. You can see we get all of the different elements with their value and name. Now if you would like to access just a very specific part of this tuple here, you can reference the tuple variable name, then use a dot, and then use the name that you assign to that value. So you can see here for ears cropped, that is false. So let's go ahead and comment this out and go ahead and run it. And we should get back false in the console when we access tuple 2 and the ears cropped. Okay, we get back false. That's what we expected. We're good to go. And for our last example, we're going to use a tuple as a return value for a function. Now, tuples are particularly useful to allow a function to return multiple values. So here we have an example of a function. And you can see we want it to return 4 values with the types int, and string. Now what this function is going to do is it's going to take a number and then it's going to return that number squared to the 3rd power and the 4th power, and then we're going to go ahead and put in a little string here that gives us a description for those answers of squared, 3rd power, and 4th power. Okay. Now notice that the return value here uses our tuple here. Okay. Now we've gone ahead and created a variable here, and we've assigned our function, and we put in our argument number of 3. So let's go ahead and print this, and we should get 3 back, squared to the 3rd power to the 4th power, and with this little string description. So let's go ahead and run it. Okay, so you can see here we get 3 squared, which is 9, 3 to the 3rd power, which is 27, 3 to the 4th power, which is 81. And if you just read this, it says 9, 27, 81 are 3 to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th power. Okay, so that's all we have for this tutorial on the basics of tuples in Swift. We will be doing many more Swift tutorials in the near future. Join us for those, and we'll see you next time.